Welcome to INNOV-8 Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. Today we're delighted to have our guest, Brian Frumberg. Brian, pleasure to have you on the show. Brian wears quite a few hats. He's the founder and CEO of VentureOut, an entrepreneur, obviously, and a community builder and a startup advisor. I'm probably soon to be also a startup founder. Brian, good to have you. If you don't mind introducing yourself for our viewers here on Entrepreneurs in Tech, and give up a bit of insights and a background on you.
Sure, Bob, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure.
As you said, my name's Brian Frumberg. My primary role is as the CEO and founder of a company called VentureOut. VentureOut is a startup accelerator and growth agency, and we are currently in the midst of launching a new sort of 12-month, 12-event summit series that will lead into the launch of VentureOut Ventures Fund 1. So I was an investor. I was working at a fund called Gotham Ventures when I launched VentureOut. And this will take me full circle, but it'll be a 13-year journey. I'm 12 years in now, and that'll be sometime in 2026. In terms of background, I have been a nerd for gadgets and tech since I was a little kid. From playing with Game Boys and Ataris and old computers and AOL and dial-up and teaching myself how to write HTML when I was in high school. I was very lucky in that I had an opportunity to internship at a company which was literally just a way for my parents to get me out of the house for the summer. I'm the oldest of six kids, and they had their hands full. They still have their hands full, even though we're adults. And that company just so happened to be incubating .coms, which are what we used to call startups. And even though I was alphabetizing resumes, I got exposed to this startup culture within this larger corporate environment. And I spent 3 summers working at Trilogy Software down in Austin, Texas, living with my cousin, and learning from these amazing interns and employees at this company that were building web companies in Web 1.0 in 98, 99, and 2000. And I got to sort of sit there and help however I could. So I got to work for a company selling cars over the internet. It was like the original CarMax, sending cars to people's houses on a flatbed truck with a bow wrapped around it in 1999. I got to help them figure out Y2K compliance, which, for the kids, just Google it, or I guess ChatGPT it now, to learn when that is. That will probably make you laugh. And sort of fast forward, I ended up going to University of Richmond, studying finance and music and philosophy, and took internships at other startups. And when I graduated, I was working for a company that had been acquired by S&P, and I spent a bunch of years working there, which was pretty disappointing because I went from working at a cool, young, fun startup to working at what felt like a government agency, and from being pretty close to product to really just being like an institutional salesperson selling a research product to hedge fund investors. And so I left there and sort of fast forward a few years, ended up taking an unpaid internship at a venture capital fund, which turned into a full-time job. And from that fund, Gotham Ventures, I had the idea to help international founders in New York that were trying to figure out how to raise money here and how to grow, how to expand their business here. And there was no one helping them. And so I decided that that was going to be how I was going to plant my flag and differentiate myself in a very crowded venture space in New York. And so I launched VentureOut, which was an event series, and it was meant to sort of promote myself as the person supporting international startups. And I was looking to get a venture capital fund to hire me and allocate a few $1 million to me investing in a handful of international founders that we would launch into the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't work. I kept running these events and then learned very quickly that the startups that we featured needed way more than just introductions to investors. They needed a lot of help and they needed to make some structural changes to their business. And so I mapped out sort of what was needed for a startup founder from abroad to come to New York and the changes that they would need to make so that a New York City venture capitalist would look at them in the same way they would look at any other New York startup founder that just happened to have an accent. Because the great thing about New York is it's 50% immigrant, and so like most people come here.
You're being conservative. I think it's even more than that.
Yes, both, and it's 50-50. It's it vacillates 5% one way or the other, and that's both the people that live there and the people that work there. And so we help a lot of foreign founders, and a lot of the time they feel like they're really having to fake it, and they don't realize that no one is like aware that they're not like from here or New Yorkers or whatever, because almost like everybody has an accent. Um, and so I started running these 1 week programs that were arming these founders with all of the things I learned they needed to know or to do or to change in order to be taken seriously by US investors. And that was when, and shortly after that, it became my full time gig. And
Hmm.
so I was really sucked into this world of international entrepreneurship and trying to help really promising founders from outside the U.S. make their American dream come true. And the thing I loved so much about that world versus the like public equity markets that I was working in before is that like my best day in my previous job was delivering research to a client that allowed them to make a better investment decision and basically help a rich person get richer. Um, which also was a part of a zero sum game, right? Because every positive trade you make on the market, there's a loser on the other side of that. And now with Venture Out, and I'll tell you a little bit more about like sort of what we do. Uh, helping these startups from abroad come and succeed here. When I have a good day, when I succeed, we're actually growing the pie. And so we have entrepreneurs that come here and grow and build and succeed, and they contribute to the innovation ecosystem and create jobs for Americans here in the US. They generally push like 25 to 40% of the money they raise and the money they make selling in the US market back to their home market, so their home ecosystem grows and benefits almost like it's foreign direct investment. Um, and we win as Venture Out, and so it's a win-win-win. And so we're
Hmm.
growing pie as opposed to figuring out how to allocate the slices differently. And so it's definitely mission driven, the work that we do. Definitely, promoting sort of everything that's great about the New York City startup ecosystem and the US market to companies outside the US. Um, Fast forward to today, we have helped just under 1,500 companies. We've hosted over 2,000 founders in our programs here in New York.
1,500 startups you helped.
Yes.
Are these startups more foreign or local, domestic from New
So
York or other parts of the states?
it's 80
Or should we
to
say abroad?
85% international, and then 15 to 20 are US companies.
It's a pretty interesting number, and I have a question for you for that. I mean, it's fair to say that you grew up in the startup world. Like, when a professional boxer, take his son always to the gym, then the son naturally going to be a boxer and say, "Hey, I grew up in the gyms. I grew up around boxes. I grew up in the ring." So you grew up, literally, I would say, from everything you said in the startup world, and you're the one to go to. You want to raise funds? Go to Brian at Venture Out. He can help you. He has the connection. He has the network. Your what's your I would say perspective, or more your outlook on where a difference between a foreign or abroad, a startup from abroad compared to a startup in the U.S. What some of the things that you see and you would say, wow, this is, yes, typical, it's obvious, that's why they will succeed, that's why. What's some of the things that you see, because you deal with this day-to-day basis, and as you said, 85% of the startups that you work with and you help and the growth and all of that, they come from abroad. I don't know what part abroad, but they could come from India, Asia, Europe, Middle East, everywhere, Israel.
Yeah, so all of the above, everything you just listed. We've had companies from 38 countries. we've had 40 foreign government agencies that we've done work for. The reason we have more agencies than countries is because we've worked with like multiple different government groups from Germany uh, and a few other countries that we've worked really closely with. So, um, yeah, the difference between, I mean, listen, our underlying philosophy is that talent around the world is evenly distributed, but opportunity isn't. And the difference we're trying to make is in bridging the gap between the wealth of opportunity we have in an ecosystem like New York City and the opportunities that people that aren't here are able to take advantage if they can find their way here. And so like opening up the opportunities and the wealth of an ecosystem like New York City to people all around the world and really all around the United States um, is sort of our mission. The difference is the biggest difference is valuation. Like you take apples to apples, two equal companies, one being built here and one being built even in a major ecosystem abroad, like in Berlin. Um, they're going to be the U.S. company is going to have 1.5 to 2 times the value, all else equal. Same amount of sales, customers, employees, tech,
Wow.
IT, and so there's a big sort of arbitrage there, which honestly was like my initial thesis when I started it as a venture as a event series, and I wanted to get a VC. Coming from the public equity world, it was like, wait, we can get companies that are just as good and have half the value, half the cost. Like, oh my God, all I have to do is deliver the opportunity to the investors. So they're going to jump on it every time. And that was just my naivete and lack of experience working in private markets. It's different. And that still even may be the case at like a growth stage or a private equity stage. But for early stage, there's just a lot more that matters than the numbers.
What is the rate of success, Brian, for some of these startups that come in from Europe? You helped about, you said 1,500 startups, am I right? 1,500, the number
Yeah,
that you mentioned earlier.
we're at 1,488.
That's a big number.
I said put a
That's
marketing document.
knock on wood, mazel tov. I mean, God bless.
It's exhausting, it's
Yes.
definitely where, all these gray hairs either come from the founders that we've helped or from my two boys. It's one or the other. More from the founders, though.
I would say so.
So the success rate is, so we talk about that in two different ways. So the failure rate, the actual like companies that have gone out of business is really low, especially for startups. It's under 10%. For companies that like are growing and scaling and manage to raise, say, another round of capital after our program, that's like closer to 70. And not every company that comes through a venture up program, especially because a lot of these programs we run on behalf of a foreign government, or at least we used to, because we don't do that anymore. We weren't in control of like the.
Well, that was one of my next questions. How do you like working with the government agency that supports some of these startups out of their country?
That's a
For you-
loaded question. I'll definitely jump into that and probably get
Yeah.
myself in a little bit of trouble. But the not every what I was trying to say is not every company that came through a program was sure they wanted to come to the U.S. A lot of the time they're exploring, they're dipping their toe in the water, and sort of like, is this the kind of place that I want to go? And a lot of what we do, even if they just come to us for a week, is try to give them exposure and an understanding of if they were here, this is what it would feel like to be a CEO, a founder of a startup in New York. This is the kind of space that you'd be in. We travel on the subway when we go to different offices. Really give them that sort of like New York experience. And so for the companies that were trying to expand here, more than half of them successfully got here. And so, and that's like, if you just think about the failure rate of startups, which is like 85%, to have that many successfully getting here, I mean, entrepreneurship is kind of crazy, right? It's like, I'm not going to take any of these normal paths. I'm going to go and do my own thing. And I think in 2025, it feels less crazy than it did when I started this in 2012. I was doing it myself. But if you then think, okay, I have done this crazy thing, but now I'm going to get even crazier. I'm going to pick my business up and I'm going to move to a foreign country into a land where they speak a different language than my language. And
Different
I'm going to
culture.
try to make it there. And thinking about New York specifically, it is one of the most expensive cities on the planet, one of the most competitive markets on the planet. And like, man, the courage that we see in the faces of these founders that come through these programs is truly inspiring. Um, And it's one of the reasons why I love what I do so much. And also, the sort of like old school investor in me loves that this is almost an untapped market. It's not that investors aren't investing in companies outside the United States. It's just that U.S. is the largest ecosystem by a mile. We have the two largest, if not three largest startup ecosystems in the world, by deals done and dollars invested. And then if you look at New York City, I mean, it's $1 trillion annual market. Is the biggest. There are more Fortune 500 HQs in New York than any city except for Tokyo. It's just like kind of an incomparable place. And God, I lost my train of thought, Bob.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Hey, it's all right. Believe me, I got plenty. I can bring it back. What is some of the most intriguing startups, in what country, I should say, what region, what part of the world, some of the most intriguing startups that you come across or you came across?
Yeah, I mean, so having like we've gone deeper in some places than others just because we have a really tight relationship. So, we've helped over 550 German companies come to the US because I've been working with the German Chamber of Commerce in a partnership we had for over a decade.
Amazing.
And we worked really deeply with Japan and the Japanese External Trade Organization, and we worked really closely with Czech Invest and had like 100 different Czech companies come through our program. So there's some ecosystems we got deep into and got to understand really well. And I think that like when you asked me that question earlier about what's the difference between companies here and companies abroad, it really is like you kind of have to go market to market. Like there are stereotypes. There are often stereotypes for a reason, and a lot of them play out in terms of like the seriousness of founders from a place, or like British founders are really self-deprecating. Eastern European founders are really technical, but need help on the business side. I'll tell you, one of the most interesting markets we've had companies come from is South Korea. Companies in Seoul, like it's just a really interesting place because the whole city is so forward from a technical perspective that often a lot of the challenges we've seen that startups face is like they come to the U.S. and the network isn't fast enough because they have like such an insane system. It's such a
Wow.
modern developed system, right? Because all of it was built recently. Samsung basically like built the entire country, and so it's like a very tech forward place. But the language barrier for companies coming from Asia is really a tough one. Um, and so often it really is about helping them communicate their idea. And like honestly though, like the challenge that we face with a South Korean or a Japanese founder trying to figure out how to communicate here in New York is not too dissimilar from the challenge you face trying to help like a technical founder who is really an engineer and wants to put on their headphones and just build, sort of like get in flow and build, and like having to get them out of their shell and having to get them used to communicating well. And I think that also goes back to that question about like the difference between American founders and founders abroad. And I learned this really from hearing it from them. It's that Americans are taught to like speak up and raise their hand and to share their opinions. And to people abroad, it looks like we're sort of trained to sell. And I think there is like a comfort with self promotion here, not in a bad way, just in a like if you want to succeed, no one's going to be your cheerleader. You need to be your own cheerleader. You need to get comfortable with sharing with people what it is that you're doing well. Otherwise, you're not going to get the kind of credit or the kind of advancement that you need. And that is not true in most cultures outside the U.S. And so you have this comfort with presenting and pitching, and also a real focus on storytelling here, right? Whereas like the typical German wants to tell you about every single detail. They want to tell you about why the colors of the buttons are the colors that they are, every single tab on the website that you can go and look at. They want to make sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and that is like very important for certain aspects of business and for building good product, that kind of attention to detail, but it's not for presenting and for storytelling. And so the challenges that companies face coming into this market are really high because not only are Americans great at pitching and storytelling, but because that's what we're used to, our expectation when people get on stage is much higher than the right. Like we expect a much higher quality pitch and presentation than a similar audience outside the U.S. would expect. And so they come into this place from their culture having to pitch in just all else equal, a much harder like ecosystem to pitch in, and then they do it in a foreign language, right? And so I'm constantly impressed by the courage that these founders demonstrate.
You know, I have to say, man, I got to give you this. You're pretty genius. You're really smart. You took all the knowledge, all the network, everything that you learned throughout the years in the in the startup culture, and you started your own company, VentureOut, and what you did something not many people did or done, and connected directly with these government agencies that who supports businesses and startups and say, hey, let's make a deal together. Guaranteed yourself. I'm spilling a secret, but it's pretty genius what you've done. Yes, I mean, and you built a very solid business from there. Huh?
It didn't feel genius at the time.
Because when we talked about a month ago, me and you, I was pretty impressed how you really went about doing this, and not many people do that. Everybody does it the hard way, Which hey, I'm just gonna put myself out there, market myself, and let startup come in and get attracted to what I do. But you said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to the source itself. There's a lot of the government agency who supports their startups in their own country. Why don't I work with them? I guarantee myself the pay right away. I don't have to chase. I don't have to sell and pitch and all of this. And I'll focus more on actually working for these startups when they bring them in. So everything's taken care of. Now my focus will be slowly on raise money, open new doors for them, market placement for them. I don't know. I'm speaking on your behalf, but
yeah, no, I mean, listen, like, that all sounds awesome, and like if it played out that way, it would have been great. But like you've gone down the entrepreneurial path. You paint this whole picture, and then and you create this detailed plan, and then you get a few inches down the path.
Well, it's always yes, yeah.
Man plans, God laughs. Like that's the experience, and so. Like I could definitely wax poetic about how I was inspired by the entrepreneurs I saw when I was interning at these .coms, and then that led me to wanting to work in startups and entrepreneurship, and I found myself working in a venture capital fund, and then I saw this great opportunity with international founders, so I started this company to help them build and raise capital, and now I'm on to putting a fund together, and everything's coming full circle, and rainbows and unicorns and fairy tales, because that's not what happened. What happened was I was unhappy with my job and trying to figure out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and I thought that venture capital was a good marriage of my then many years of experience in financial services and my desire and sort of experience that I didn't really get credit for the experience I had working at startups, because it all was before I graduated college, even though it was really fundamental to my experience and development and
yes, and give you the knowledge you needed. Absolutely.
Yeah, but
the foundation of all of the knowledge you have. Yes.
Try talking to a hiring manager about how they really should be considering the experience I had in high school and in college, right, when I'm 26. No one takes that seriously. And so I take an unpaid job working at a venture capital fund at 27 years old. Not a great way to be funding an expensive lifestyle in the city. And then was able to turn that into something. And then I had a real desire to plant my own flag, because it's a very busy sort of industry. It's hard to break out of the typical construct of what someone in a starting at the bottom as an analyst at a venture capital fund and then walking the ladder up. And so I was like, what, I'm going to help international founders, and I started hosting events, mostly because I just I went to a lunch. I met a woman who worked at the Canadian consulate. She was trying to figure out how to get New York venture capitalists to pay attention to the Canadian startups she was working with, and I was like, I work at a venture capital fund. I know a bunch of investors in the city. I'll help. And we put together this project, and then like post financial crisis, budgets got pulled back, and so like a couple days before we were signing a contract, all their budget to be able to put this whole thing together got pulled, and so then I'm left there, holding the bag with like a bunch of time and energy and effort put into something that just wasn't going to happen. And so then I was like, you know what? If Canada has this problem, I bet other countries have an even bigger problem because Canada's like so close and culturally very similar and same language. And so I started sort of like shopping it around, and I got a lot of people from a lot of different government agencies saying they were interested, but no one had budget, no one had money. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not waiting for government. I'm just going to start this. And so I started it as an event series where I was like, I'm going to find great companies, bring them to New York, introduce them to investors, great deal, great founder, great investor, magic's going to happen. And then that all failed because the VCs were like, wait, they're not a Delaware C Corp. Wait, their intellectual property isn't domiciled in the US. Like, oh, they don't have a plan to do that yet. Like, okay, great. Like, call me in a year when you figured all that stuff out. And so, like, again, like I had this plan, this event series, it was going to brand me. And then it was like, you know what, this entire strategy doesn't work. And so I was like, okay, well, if that doesn't work and they're saying they need all these things to get done, well, let me figure out what the list of things is. And then I'm going to put together like not only the event that I was organizing, but like a bunch of activities around it to give the startups the tools they needed. And then that worked, that stuck. But again, like I ran it for free. Right, I was like on the phone, on Zoom calls, on Skype calls in 2013, trying to talk British and Portuguese and Argentinian founders to fly into New York. I wasn't charging them anything. I was charging tickets to come to the pitch night, so I could afford to cater it. Like that was it.
You went through it. You really grinded.
And I got a couple of sponsors, like a law firm threw me $1,000 here, and so I got enough like beer money and rent money to run around and organize this. And then finally I got like my first government to agree to fund it. And then after that, we started actually charging startups to participate, which I avoided doing for a while because I just didn't want to have the best companies willing to pay. I wanted to have the best companies, period. But what was so interesting, and like I literally had a fight with someone that was helping me out about how they were wrong, but they had helped me enough. I was like, you know what, we'll give this a test, fine. We'll put a price tag on it for the companies instead of just giving it to them. But I was like, I'm telling you, it's going to be worse. And like, man, I was so wrong. I think that what we were suffering from was the associated value of something that has a price of zero, right? And just like the mental note that people put on that is, oh, well, if it costs nothing, it must be worth nothing. And so as soon as we put $1,000 price tag on it, we had more companies applying, we had more serious companies interviewing, and we had the best cohort we ever put together. And when they came, they took it more seriously because they had skin in the game. And anyway.
No, I mean, just curious that you come across so many startups. Do you ever say, you know what, I want to trade my fee for equity? I love what you're doing, and I see major potential. I want to be part of it.
Yes, like we thought about it, but I never ended up doing it for a couple reasons. One, especially back then, like the first 7 years, I was running only really short form programs. And so the fee wasn't that big. They're coming through the program for a week. And like, yeah, I'd spent a lot more time with them after that. Like we're constantly supporting our alumni that have, sort of completed our programs. But, I don't know, like it just didn't feel right to me. Like if you have a company that is in a place where they're willing to give up equity to avoid that fee, like generally that's just because they're in a tough spot and or because they don't truly understand yet the value of their equity. And that's very common amongst early stage founders where they have no cash, they have a lot of equity, so like, you know what, I'm going to give equity. And like that ends up becoming something that for founders that go on to be successful, they end up really regretting usually. They completely undervalued and undercut themselves on that. And so I didn't want to be someone that was taking advantage of that. And also like equity is only worth something if you truly believe the company is worth something.
That was my point. Yes.
Yeah, and so my whole so the way I've always operated is like I've never taken equity in exchange for like our program fee.
Or services, yeah.
I have only joined as a formal advisor. And so what I say to these founders is like, hey, let's like come through a program or we'll work together in some capacity. And after we've gotten to know each other over a few months, if you still feel like you would like to have me involved in the way that an advisor would typically be involved and give that kind of time, and you think that it's worth equity in your company, then we can talk about it. And by then, I will have made my own conclusion about whether I think the company's has a good chance of making it, and whether I think their equity has value for that time. And so that's how I've done it. I honestly have done it for less than 10 companies. And like, if I was running a 3-month accelerator and I had equity in all these companies, I'd be a billionaire now. But like my wife's always reminding me of that. But that wasn't the kind of program I built or ran. Those weren't the kinds of founders I was working with. And now I just am excited to get to a place where, like when I meet these companies and we do the work that we do for them, whether it's in a 1-week, thing or a 3-month accelerator that we run, and I think about what could we do next? What's the next way that we could really help change their lives and accelerate their growth? And it's money, especially in like the brutal fundraising environment that we
Do you come across startups that say, hey, you know what? We're not looking for money. We're looking for doors to be open. We want to
all the
place
time.
our product in the
All the
market. It has more value
Yeah.
than raising money because that's what's going to give us the valuation we need
Well,
and
it's
the
not
money
only
we need.
that, Bob. It's like, and this is one of the things I learned early on. If like we have a government will come in and they'll say we want to run a fundraising program, and I'm like, okay, cool. So we'll have a lot of investors and we'll have an investor pitch night, and then I'm like, but we're gonna have sales and business development sessions too, and they're like, oh, we don't want that. We just really want to focus on fundraising, and what I end up having to sort of educate them on is that a, a fundraising program is a business development program because no investors here are going to take you seriously until you have some initial traction in the U.S. market. And so we need to help you figure out sales. And even if you haven't done it, you're going to go talk to U.S. investors about expansion to the U.S. without any plan for the U.S. market, any real experience in doing it here, right? Like they need to, at a minimum, have a really detailed plan put together, and there's some like evidence that whatever they've gotten to work and click in the market they're in today is not a fluke, and that it is not specific to their market. It's something that could also work in the U.S. market. And so like we have to help, but like we have a lot of companies that have already raised a decent amount of money, and they're just focusing. They don't want to meet investors. They are focused
Want partnerships. That's it. New partnerships.
sales,
Yeah.
customers, figuring out how to test the market, running outbound campaigns, figuring out how to get their early semblance of product market fit.
Brian, most of the startups that you guys come across at VentureOut, are they, would I say, the majority of them tech based, or there's other type of startups, more product or based?
I mean, we have a lens that is very similar to like a generalist venture capital fund. So we're looking primarily at SaaS companies. I mean, people are talking a lot today about how like AI and agentic AI is going to like kill SaaS, and that's probably true, but it's definitely not true today. We have done a bunch with hardware tech companies, so those are going to be a marriage of hardware and software. And then we've done a bunch of stuff in like the consumer retail tech space, and we've had a handful of consumer brands that have come through. Also, a lot of venture funds will invest in those because you had those companies like Bonobos and Dollar Shave Club that showed that just because you weren't software doesn't mean you couldn't scale at that venture pace that VCs require. And but we try to stay away from services. And the only exception to that is like software and services. So like, I sell you SaaS, and like for that you get some support for it. But like always an underlying scalable tech product or consumer brand.
As an entrepreneur, would you say being an entrepreneur is a blessing or is a curse?
Oh, it's both.
Both.
Yeah, 100% it's both. God, I was like kind of fighting with my wife about this yesterday.
Because you would have you would go all the way in. It don't matter. You don't care about the risks.
It is. There's not stability until you're far along, right? You really set a foundation for yourself, and not everyone is built for a roller coaster ride. And I am always telling the founders that we work with and my team and people around me, like, you really have to celebrate the small wins. Every single thing that you can justify celebrate it, because there's like you're taking more punches than you're given. and it's a hard road, and it's like a lot of the journey is looking 1,000 no's in the face just to get the one yes, and really reveling in that one yes and letting that fill your tank so you can go on and just take the beating of another 1,000 no's until you go out and get the next yes. And um, it's hard, and a lot of the time you don't know if what you're doing is the right thing. You don't know if it's going to work out, um, and that's scary. It takes a lot of cojones
Yes.
to sort of like put your
Wha-
eggs all in that basket and roll the dice and just see. And people do it because they're driven to do it. They feel like it's their mission, it's the kind of life they want to live, or just because they believe it's going to work out. And I think that like um, impractical belief is pretty core to like the earliest stages of getting something off the ground. It needs to turn to practicality pretty quickly, but generally most people that are going and doing this are considered crazy by a lot of people, and you got to be willing to take that crazy and
What's
run with it.
What's your advice for the younger generation, the upcoming generation who go into college, who just graduated from college, and they kind of at a crossroad? If you're not an entrepreneur, then you're a failure. And not
Yes.
everybody have it. Not everybody really, and they feel. Do you think there's a lot of pressure, friends, family, peers, social media, all of that kind of pressure them to be an entrepreneur? But some people will be great working for corporations and companies and grow from there, become great CEOs, great managers, great leaders, and they run and get ownership of some of these companies, and they're the new millionaires and billionaires. Not every entrepreneur is a billionaire. Some of these leaders from corporation who started as an employee at a certain level and then they grew.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this before because I mean, if that's really the case and what it is that the younger generation is feeling today, this pressure towards entrepreneurship and
Yes,
creating something of their own,
yes,
what a 180-degree flip from when I was a kid, where it was like, get a big job at a big firm that I've heard of and make as much money as you can doing that, to bet it all on the farm, on like your belief. It was like, I don't know, it was not as normalized as I think it is today.
not as a trend.
Yeah,
No
and
trend.
I think that like kids today, and like it's not just kids, it's everybody today. Like we're all
Yeah.
subject to the FOMO that's created on social media, and I think that like a lot of what people are posting are the joys of running your own thing, and it's like start your own brand, or advertise stuff on Amazon and make $10,000 a week, working from home in your underwear, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all that stuff is it's like snake oil salesmen. Like they're trying to get you to do it because they want you to pay for a course that they've created to help you figure out how to do it. Like there's definitely a hustle there.
Yes.
So I think that, like you said, not everyone's built to be an entrepreneur or a founder. It doesn't mean that startup life isn't a fit for you, right? There's startups of every shape and size. Like you can go work at a company that's raised $75 million. It's still going to be young and innovative and fast moving,
Yeah.
but like comes with health insurance and a 401k, and you're not getting paid all in equity and no cash. Like you get a real salary. You just also get the benefit of equity. And in working in that kind of, sort of fun, loose, um, environment as opposed to like a stiffer corporate environment. And some people are built for the path, but I have this like old school sort of mentality, more like from my parents' generation, and I just really feel like people shouldn't like jump ship. It's sort of like this idea that you don't leave a job without having another job. These people are like, I'm just gonna quit and I'm gonna, interview and I'll figure it out. I just think that creates a position of desperation, right? When you try to do something like that, you have to look at your bank account or whatever it is that's sort of supporting you, and it's got there's a stopwatch, right? Like there's a countdown clock because you can't go search for forever. Eventually, like that time's going to run out, and the closer that clock gets to zero, the more pressure you feel, and like good decisions are not made when you're feeling desperate or under pressure. And so I always motivate people to try to figure things out while they're working their current job. And once you get enough evidence that things are moving in the right direction, then jump in. It's still crazy to do it then. You're not like less courageous because you're or more innovative because you took a bigger risk. I think that like the risk with this business is inherent. You can't avoid it. It's there. And so the job, and this is also true of VCs, right? Like the job of investing as a venture capitalist, an angel investor, like the game is risky. Your job is to mitigate that risk as much as you can through knowledge, um, and insight. And so, like I tell founders to do the same. That's the beauty of still being in college or even in high school. Is like the opportunity cost of starting something is like your video game time, and so, and also especially in a university environment, like you're surrounded by all of the things that you need. Like, hey, you want a technical co-founder, go to the computer science program at your school, and talk to a professor and ask them who they would recommend of their students that's really good, and then ask them if they want to get started, like need cloud storage resources. The college has that, they'll give it to you. Need an expert to be an advisor on it, go find a professor who's an expert, they'll give it to you. They probably have an entrepreneurial department that'll even coach you on how to build it and scale it and get it off the ground. There probably are tech entrepreneurs that are on the payroll there that can give you some guidance. And like your cost of doing it isn't, it's just it's your free time, right? It's just like,
Yes.
and schools builds a ton of free time into this schedule, and so you're just choosing it to do it that way as opposed to being in a club or whatever other extracurricular things are for college kids to do these days. So yeah, I don't know what the conclusion was there, but that's my thought on it.
What is next for Brian and Venture Out?
So we recently made a bit of a pivot in what we're doing. Um, yeah, it was sort of a decision that I came to in January this year, started implementing in February, and the like culmination of those efforts and the sort of kickoff of this new path starts on May 27th. So I decided that I wanted to get back to the work that we did in our early days where we had total control over the programs we ran, the startups we worked with, the speakers we had in our programs. And, I got to a place where we were just way past the law of diminishing returns. We were running a program every other week. We had like 250 companies come through a program in 1 year. I was like just constantly juggling between these different programs, and like we had a team, and everyone got value. Like every program added value, but they weren't as good as they could be, and I was spread really thin. And I was getting to a place where like I wasn't even getting to know the founders that were coming through the program. I was relying on my team to really be connected with them, and I didn't like that so much. And so I decided in January that we're not going to be running government sponsored programs anymore. We are going to be running sector focused programs. Each one is going to be much bigger and better and badder than what we used to do because we're running one a month now and we have a lot more energy and resources to put into it. And as opposed to trying to create a program that's like just good enough for a group of foreign founders, we are focusing on themes that will make up the sector focus of the fund that I'm launching. And so I'm launching a sector focused series of summits featuring 10 to 15, typically Series A founders, and bringing the best of the best that we are capable of pulling together for them in terms of network in New York. So the first program that we're running is the week of Memorial Day. It's the 26th, 27th. It's the 27th, 8th, 9th, and 30th of May. It is our generative AI leadership summit. We have speakers from OpenAI, IBM, Lazarus, MasterCard. We have the best AI investors in New York coming through. We have some amazing generative AI founders from Germany and Canada and Norway and others, and the US that are going to be joining. And so essentially, what we're doing is um, we're using each one of these programs to improve the network that we have in that specific theme and subsector of tech right? So for this one, generative AI, the week of June 16th, we're doing construction tech and built environment technology. And so we're improving our network by going out and finding like I said, the best of the best that New York has to offer in terms of investors and entrepreneurs and corporate innovation officers and the rest. We are building our knowledge of that space because we are interviewing with like dozens of companies. We are talking to all of these investors and thought leaders that are making up the program, and then we're participating in the program ourselves. So we're learning from it in the way that anyone else is. And then for every 10 companies that come through, there are 2,000 that we sourced and researched. And we are going to be publishing that research now, which we've never done before. And so we're going to be putting together what we think will be, for each one of those subsectors, the deepest and most insightful research on the early stage aspect of that sector globally. And all of that, and then all those companies that we're researching are potential deal flow. So we're improving our network, our knowledge, and our deal sourcing in every single subsector of tech that we plan on focusing on with the fund. And then at the end of that 1-year summit series, we'll have the launch of VentureOut Ventures Fund 1 in Q2 2026. So that is what's next. I'm very excited about it.
Amazing. What if somebody want to get a hold of you? The best way to get a hold of you, Brian?
Details are on our website. So our website is ventureoutny.com. If you want to check out the summit, it's aisummit.ventureoutny.com. I am Brian, with an I, the real Irish way, BRIAN at ventureoutny.com. And I'm pretty sure my cell phone's on the website. Like, just drop me a text. I'm very available. You can get me.
Amazing. Well, you know what? The timing couldn't be any better for such a discussion and interview, because of the programs that you're starting this month on May 26th, 27. Am I right? Yes, that's the generative AI in New York City. Right. Yes, definitely. Would love to attend. This is a great way. Brian, really, it's a pleasure having you today on Entrepreneurs in Tech. You're really a true entrepreneur, and you provide so much help out there that a lot of these, whether they're domestic or abroad, startups, companies that need the help, you definitely provide everything that they need. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Bob.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share INNOV-8 Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech podcast. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.